Welcome to this episode of Metawell. Cecil, I feel like I gotta check in with you at the beginning of these. Be like, how's your well-being today?
That's the real twist to this podcast. It's for my well-being. It's just my
Oh, wait till
my
the season
check-in.
finale when we're like, how well is Cecil?
And if I'm not, it's your job to fix it.
Oh, that's also a twist to this podcast. Maybe one other question that'll kind of segue us into today's topic. How would you say your spiritual well-being is?
I haven't, as far as I'm aware, had any spiritual crises lately, so it's somewhere in the green, I guess.
But that begs another question. How do you know? How do you know, or how does one know that their well-being is in the green? How do you assess that?
I feel like there's a lot of layers to that question potentially.
Oh, we,
Uh,
we, we've got all day here.
no, we don't. Well, I mean, one potential answer is some expert on that thing could tell you. But aside from that, how do you know for yourself? I mean, we kind of touch on it in every single episode, don't we? Like when you're not tending to this thing or when it's like going unfed, that component to you, that piece of your well-being, you suffer in some kind of a way. Like you can very obviously notice physical consequences of your physical well-being suffering, definitely mental well-being suffering, emotional well-being suffering. I think it's noticeable when your social connection is suffering, or you're feeling disconnected from people, or feeling like you're not a part of some network, some community. It starts to feel like maybe it's a little fuzzier if you're not spiritually well. If there's some, to me, the question sounds like what might be your spiritual, what's the consequence of not having some kind of spiritual well-being? What's the spiritual consequence there? And I would guess that it's whatever the antithesis is to a lot of these things that we've been talking about. Like in the previous episode, we talked a lot about meaning making and higher purpose and being in line with your values and all these kinds of things. So I'm going to guess that uh, the lack of well-being in this area is some kind of, I joked, but a crisis of purpose, I suppose, feeling like you don't have a purpose, you don't know your purpose, you're still searching and figuring out, or it's unclear, that the things you do are without meaning or without direction. You're just kind of floating along and not really sure what's guiding you or what you're supposed to be doing. And or there's dissonance between how you're living your life and what you think might be important, what you think might be valuable, which is fairly common. I think lots of people actually pop up in therapy because there's some kind of dissonance there. They value honesty and family, but somehow found themselves in an affair, or a very common one. They value, working for service of other people and helping and giving to other people, but their job is a very money focused job, or just doesn't seem to matter at all in the grand scheme of things as far as what they care about. Maybe it's a very manual labor kind of job that doesn't seem to have any type of social purpose to it, or whatever purpose that they might be looking for. There's a disconnect between what they value and how they're living, what they're spending their time on. That is what comes to my mind for some kind of a spiritual unwellness.
I really like the idea or the concept of like the barometer being a bit of dissonance. Um, and I think that like I think sometimes it might be difficult to know like, am I healthy? I guess the comparison oftentimes is like a fish doesn't really know that they're in water until they get out of the water, right? So I think sometimes with lots of these components of well-being, but I think especially with this of spiritual well-being, it's kind of just like water that you swim in. If I have a sense of purpose, if I feel a connection to a higher being, it's just like that's my environment and I feel really comfortable in it. So I may not necessarily take note of it. But once it starts to wane, or once I start to
Mhm.
question it, or once, my world gets rocked in some way, then I start to notice, oh, there's this disconnect. There's this, like you said, dissonance there. And I think that might be the case. But I think one of the things that we've come back to time and time again in in these podcasts is the value of intentionality, and that when we are intentional, when we put deliberate effort into well-being, whether that's into eating a healthy diet, if whether
Mhm.
that's into having an exercise routine, whether that's like having moments of meditation, whether whatever it is, I think that rolls over here into this spiritual realm as well. Like, I can be intentional about having practices that support a religious or spiritual regime. I can have like deliberate attempts at trying to figure out, like, what is my purpose, what are my interests, how do I align with groups that are bigger than myself. And so I think sometimes we could just like be swimming in it and feel like, oh, it's great, but it could even be enhanced if I introduce a bit of intentionality into it. Does that make sense?
Right. It does. And it makes me, I have a question because I think you're right that that does apply to all these areas of well-being, even something that's less tangible, like the spiritual well-being, or less observable at least. And I know this isn't what we usually focus on, especially in our therapy, but I'm interested in wanting to know because you're right, intentionality is what takes someone from lesser well-being, lesser wellness to more, greater, better well-being. They just have to identify, here's the areas that I need to work on. Here's the things I need to adjust. Here's the outcomes that I need to start reaching for. And then I move towards that and I pay attention and notice, all the different areas of my life that are involved in that and what needs to change. That sounds so simple. It sounds like you're just turning a knob, you're just adjusting a thing, you look for what you need to see and you change it. But what is it that you think seems to get in people's way? Because if it was that simple, everyone would either already be perfectly well or would be very quick to change if they find themselves not well. And that's obviously not the case. There's lots of people who struggle with lots of different areas of their well-being. I guess today we're specifically talking about spiritual well-being. If you are finding yourself with this spiritual dissonance that we're talking about, you're finding yourself without the purpose, without meaning, you're not spiritually well. What do you think gets in people's way when if they were to decide to notice they have a problem and they're trying to now change to become more spiritually well?
Yeah, it's a big question and a complicated question, so I'll do my best to answer. I think one of the things that I would say is, well, I guess I'll link it back to, so there's this researcher, and his name was David Moberg, and he was kind of looking at spiritual well-being, and he divided it up even more than we talked about last time. He divided it into like two different components. And one of those components was religious well-being, and another one of the components, it was existential well-being. And that together these two things kind of were the multidimensional concept of spiritual well-being. And so, like, the religious well-being, he kind of conceptualized as like how close am I, or what's my relationship with God or a higher power. And so when you ask that question of like what gets in people's way, if we're talking about like a religious well-being component, it might simply be a belief. Like, do I have a belief in God? Do I have a belief in a higher power? um, I think oftentimes when you're in that realm of religious well-being, then it's like there are certain principles or doctrines that you're supposed to live by or adhere to. And I think sometimes there's like going back to that idea of dissonance of like, well, I know the ideal would to live this way, to act this way, to align myself with these, but I don't really like to. Maybe my personality is something different than that, or maybe, in a lot of religions, they have like restrictions on what you can eat or what you can drink or those kinds of things. And and yet the culture that we live in is kind of a counterculture to that religious culture. Things like piety or humility or those kinds of things, they're not valued as much. It's like, well, you should achieve the very best, you should become, so I think sometimes what causes the dissonance is the culture that we live in doesn't really align with this religious culture or ideology, and therefore there's dissonance, and I have to consistently be bouncing back and forth. I have to live within this culture, but I also am trying to adhere to these principles and guidelines. And I think people feel torn, and people feel some allegiance more or less in one direction or the other. And so I think choice creates some dissonance. In addition, if we're talking just about like the religious well-being, there's hundreds of religions, thousands of religions. So again, choice of like, which one of these do I believe in? Do I want to align with? Do I want to devote myself to? There's so much variety in what religion is out there. So I think part of it is like, how do I, again, I think this would require some intentionality of like, what do I believe? What can I adhere to? What do I want my life to be like? And which one of these religions out there matches closely to what my ideal is? That might create some dissonance, some, uncertainty. But if you look at then the other side, that existential well-being, Moberg kind of talked about it as like what you identified of like, it's a sense of meaning, a sense of purpose, a sense of life satisfaction. What might cause the dissonance in this regard is, for lack of a better way of saying it, life, right? Like I live life and going to work every day, taking care of kids every day, getting up at a certain time, going to bed at a certain time. Those aren't inherently like packed with meaning or purpose. They're just like mundane details sometimes of what we do in life. And again, I think if we don't like take that time to be intentional to say like, how do I want purpose to influence what job I get? How do I want meaning to influence the kind of parent I am or the interactions I have with my kids or whatever? I think sometimes we can just get caught in the like hamster wheel of life. I got all these things to do and I just got to get through them. I don't necessarily infuse a meaning into them. I think in addition, one of the things that can, God, this turned into a way longer answer than maybe you wanted. But I think another thing that can kind of contribute to that is, again, life. But we live right now in such a contentious, divisive environment that if you fit one religion, then you got to be more right than another religion. If you're affiliated with one political party, then you've got to be more right than another from a different political party. If your kids go to a certain school, then you have to not like that other school. Like we just are pitted against each other in so many ways that I feel like meaning is kind of thrust upon us. Like this school is better than that school. This party is better than that party. And we oftentimes don't have a lot of like deliberate action, or we don't have the time to slow down to say like, what's really true here? Does it have to be this or that? And so we just get caught up in the like, well, this is just what I do, this is just what I think, this is just what we believe, this is whatever. So there's no question around like, is this serving me well? And I think sometimes we gotta like, for that existential well-being, we really got to sit with it and say, if this is about purpose, if this is about meaning, if this is about life satisfaction, what what is going to lead me there? How do I get there? And I don't think oftentimes we take the time to really go through that thought exercise.
I completely agree with that last part. Well, just a warning, I have another question, but I'll get to that in a second.
I'll try
That
to
last
answer
part,
it quicker next time.
we got all day, I was told.
I was told we didn't.
I guess we'll see who's right. Um, so what you were just saying there at the end, I think is a huge component to this was a part of the existential piece of spiritual well-being that you were describing. But I do think a choice in meaning making, choosing what's meaningful to you, not only I wouldn't necessarily describe it as assigning meaning, but kind of aligning meaning, I guess, between yourself and the ways that you're living or the things that are important to you, rather than, like you said, having it thrust upon you or just kind of like floating along with whatever seems to be happening around you. Because culture kind of inherently has meaning that comes with it. Social groups kind of inherently, they have ways of meaning making that come with it. And who's to say that those things are optimal or will make you happy or will, really be compatible with what you very much value and who you want to be and how you want to live your life. So I do think intentionality and then what you do with that intentionality, that choice is very huge in spiritual well-being. But my question was actually on the religious side, religious half of that this model that you're describing. You didn't say this, but it sounds like clarity in what you believe is very key component here, which I thought was interesting because in modern times there are these very I feel like religion has been modified many times to fit, cultures and places and times that they're belonging to. Um, and one of the recent shifts, it seems, in organized religion is that it can be more vague. It doesn't have to be as definitive. And I hear very, very often from lots of people in therapy or friends or just casually on the internet, people talking about it, that they feel spiritual or they feel there's a higher power, they feel like they believe in a god or in some kind of a spiritual system, but they don't really zoom into a structured, definitive. This is this and this and this, and that means I have to do this. And here's our, here's the text that I believe in, and here's the principles that I abide by. It's just I guess, there's obviously lots of individual versions of this that people might be subscribing to, but in general, how I would describe it is they believe in some kind of a higher power, and it kind of ends there, or not too long after there. There's nothing beyond that that might say, so then now I have to be this kind of a person or behave in this kind of a way, or here's how I worship that higher power, or how I should react in response to that higher power, or here's what I'm called to do because of this belief in this thing. It's just kind of I'm not using the word in a negative way, just a vague belief in something is there. I hear that from people very often. Does that lack of clarity imply where they might fall in terms of where their spiritual well-being is?
For some people, it could. They could feel like I can't find that thing that really aligns with me, so I can't really adhere to all of these principles. On the other hand, I think some people probably feel really comfortable with the vagueness and say anything more defined than this might cause me to feel uncomfortable. I think there's going to be a huge amount of variety in that. I should probably also be really upfront. Like I'm a very religious person, and so I have bought into a particular religion, and I attend that and try to align my life with those principles in that way. And so from my own religious perspective, if it became more cloudy than like definitive, I would probably get into like what you where you started this whole thing around like a faith crisis. Is this particular doctrine, is this particular belief system, is this working for me? And so I think sometimes the like definitiveness, that might be the barometer of like, okay, you're religiously well if you can align with these things. If you can't, that might be an indication that you're unsure, or now you're back into
Mhm.
that area of vagueness. But I think people on the other end of the spectrum, they might look at me and say, well, because you've bought into this one particular way of being and doing things, that might communicate to us maybe you're not as open or tolerant, or maybe this, the grand principles of like love everybody and accept everybody, maybe you've become too specific in those things, and so you can't do these religious or spiritual things as well. So I think it can depend on where you are on the spectrum. I think anybody could look at somebody else and be like, you're doing it right or you're doing it wrong. Um, I think that's where it might be really helpful to then tie it to that existential. Um, that again, for me personally, does this specific belief system, does this specific way of being, does that add meaning to your life? Does that provide you with purpose in life? Does that help you to feel like there's a sense of satisfaction in life? If those two things align, then it seems like you're in a good fit. If somebody's in a much more vague place and you ask the same questions, does that bring meaning to your life? Does that add purpose to your life? Does that help you have life satisfaction? And they can answer yes. I think that's a good place for me to be. I can see how people in very different places on the spectrum could end up in the same sense of like spiritual well-being. I feel good at where I am in this realm. um, and I think if we take it out of spirituality for just a second and put it into one of the other realms of well-being, right? If we say like, are you are you physically well? I think we can be like on a huge continuum. Am I a marathon runner? No, I'm not a marathon runner. So does that mean that I'm not physically well? My children are big swimmers. I'm by far the worst swimmer in my house. Does that mean that I'm not physically, that I don't have physical well-being because I can't swim as well as a 14-year-old? Some people might argue, yeah, like you don't have the stamina, you don't have the breath control, you don't have the form, you don't have like, those are all indications that you're physically unwell. But if we expand it and I say, well, I try to exercise on a regular basis. I try to do all these things like eat well, and I don't sleep as well as I should. But like, are there other barometers of physical well-being? Yeah, I don't like, besides these glasses, I don't have any like physical disabilities. I don't have anything that isn't, like is life threatening at this point. So it depends, I think, on where we put the barometer. And if the barometer is like you have to run marathons or you have to be a good swimmer, I fail. Like I'm not physically well. But if the barometer is somebody somewhere else, then I pass. And I think it's the same thing in spiritual well-being, is that I don't know if there's a one size fits all. I think oftentimes, especially in this spiritual realm, it's, do I feel aligned? Do I feel good about where I am? Do I feel comfortable? Am I absent of crisis? Does that answer your question?
I have no expertise on this whatsoever. So, I mean, yes, that was enlightening to me, but as far as verifying correctness, I can't.
It wasn't any shorter than the first answer. So I think you need to stop asking the question.
I am officially out of questions, so you're safe for now.
All right, I have a question for you then.
And we're out of time.
No, we're not. No, we're not. We got all day. So I have regularly heard this statistic, and I'm going to try to do a little bit more research and put a couple things in the show notes for people. But regularly, I hear the statistic that
Mhm.
religious people are happier than non-religious people.
Mm.
And doing a quick search again, they do cite two different meta-analyses. I'm going to look these up and verify before I actually post them in the show notes. But I've heard this stat, and this has verified what I have heard. And they talk about how religious people oftentimes report higher life satisfaction, having more meaning and purpose in life, having a greater social support system, and having lower levels of depression and substance abuse on average.
Mm.
So, my question is, this is an opinion question, but one, do you believe it? But two, if that's the case, what implications does that have for spiritual well being?
I don't know the specific statistics, so I can't say that's not correct. It sounds right. I mean, I would believe that.
Okay, great.
Uh, um, and then implications for spiritual well-being. I think whether someone is religious or not, they would have to agree that there's so many benefits to being religious. I guess have to agree. Some people, I guess, feel more negatively about religion. from an objective stance, you can see belonging to a community. Of course, that's going to increase wellness in some kind of capacity. Having like this circle of people who can help you and tend to you. If you fall in hard times, you're sick, you're depressed, you're dealing with some kind of issue that comes up that is in any of the areas of well-being. There's people who feel like it is a responsibility of theirs to help you, who care about you, who say you're one of them. Not only that, but also specific to spiritual well-being, it's a bit of a roadmap too. It might not have all the pieces kind of filled in, but it says there is a road and you need to get yourself moving along this road. And there's stuff that will pop up that might not be totally fully explained already, but you at least have the plot line, so to speak. You have something to kind of guide you and move you along and to help you figure out each of the steps along the way too, which I wouldn't assume everyone automatically gets without religion. I think people can get that without religion or figure it out, maybe define it for themselves, but I don't think that's an automatic thing. Same with the community piece to it too. You obviously can find community, but I wouldn't assume everyone does find at least that tight knit of a community. So those are just examples, but there's obvious benefits to being a part of a religion and to being committed to a religion, especially a religious community. In terms of what does that mean for spiritual well-being, that's a realization of how important it is to have some kind of intentionality about your spiritual well-being. I don't know why I wasn't intentionally trying to study this in college, but I did take a couple of religion classes. I think I took maybe two or three.
It's funny
Not
that
that
you started with you should be intentional, and then you immediately went to I don't know why, but I ended up taking these classes.
well, I remember one of them counted as a writing credit, and I was like, I needed this writing credit to finish my major or something like that. So it was like a class you had to write a bunch of essays, and it just happened to be about religion. And I needed a class that was writing based. So that was one of them. I don't know what the others were, why I did this. Um, I'm more intentional now. This was years ago.
I think I derailed you. I didn't really mean to derail you.
Okay. What I was going to say though was in the first religion class that I took, we hardly talked about any specific religion. It was more of dissecting what is religion in the first place. It seemed like the point of, not to derail myself, but classes like that are my least favorite, where it's just throwing out a vague philosophical definition of things. But the point seemed to be that anything could be a religion or could resemble religion in that you with a set of values and beliefs, a set of behavioral customs, a way of relating to other people, people who believe and think and feel similarly to how you feel, places you go to do certain things or pay attention to certain things in certain ways, all the cultural pieces that can be attached to religion. And when you take these components and fill in those blanks with lots of different things, you start to realize that it doesn't have to just be Christianity or Islam or Buddhism or something like that. Things like American football can start to fill in that blank. You could gather with people at the same place and do the same things at the same time. Coincidentally, Sunday quite often for a lot of people and teams. You might eat the same foods and dress in a certain kind of a way, and there's certain music that goes with that, and you have a belief, and there's values and things that go along with that. For the most part, I want to speak for everyone, but for a lot of people, it obviously doesn't seem to be on par as the same level as, a place of worship. And this is for a structured religious reason, but it does kind of fit the key components of what seems to comprise religion and organized religion or consistent religion. And so I'm saying all of that to say that there are things that people can do to fill in the gaps. They can place this intentionality somewhere. They can try to achieve, the things that religion gives them. I don't know how to measure whether or not that would be sufficient or if that, is the same thing, that these are equivalent. But I do know that people do have things that go into those spaces for them. I would say regardless, you have to be intentional, like we spoke about. You have to um, invest in what's the meaning here and why do I do the things that I do. You know, if you're, I don't care much for football, but some people, it's like literally I can't miss this game and I have to wear this jersey or these socks and I have to sit in my seat. And oh, me and my friends, we've been doing this for 10 years and we all have to keep doing this. And like, I can't miss this. We have season tickets to go see it in person, or we always go to so and so's place and we always watch it there every week. And there is this like very strong sense of commitment and value there. And value doesn't necessarily just have to be that they want their team to win. It could intrinsically be they really care about this community of people, or this is a part of their identity. They're a fan of this thing, and people know them this kind of a way, and people know them for their knowledge of this thing, or something like that. This is a crucial component to who they are and how they're living their life, which people could say the same about their religious identity as well. And so it serves some purposes that religion can serve, which, to circle back to what your question was at the beginning, I think you have to have something that you're going to be filling your spiritual cup with. And the answer might not always be obvious or traditional. But I think all of us should be working at it. All of us should be trying to put something there.
Yeah, I think what's really valuable about what you said in connection to this, so like those researchers go on to like modify a bit, and they try to like clarify like why might religious people say we're happier than non-religious people do. And one of the things that they talked a lot about, which you kind of got to in that answer, is like, is this intrinsic religiosity or is this extrinsic religiosity? Am I doing this because it aligns with who I am and the central features of my life? And do I really feel like there is purpose and meaning in this? And when people are intrinsically religious, then it provides a whole lot of meaning to them, and they do report, oh, I'm much happier living in this way. Whereas people who are extrinsically um, religious, they're doing it for like a status symbol oftentimes, or they're doing it for a sense of security in this environment. Maybe everybody fits into one particular religion, so it's easier for me to go along with it, to be part of this community, to not stand out. Even though I don't necessarily agree with these religious principles, I'm doing it for some other reason than the religion part. Um,
Mhm.
they tend to report less happiness. And again, you can see, like, if I'm not intentional about living in alignment with what I believe or what I see, I'm doing it in order to fit in. It's not gonna give me the same sense of value. And in your football example, if I asked you as a non-football fan, okay, for the next 10 years, I need you to pick a football team. I need you to find a community. I need you every single week to go watch this football game with them. And I surround you with people who value that. You might find that you can do it for 10 years and that you might, get interested in it, but you would be doing it potentially for an extrinsic reason. You're not going to find as much value or fulfillment from doing that than if it's really inherent to who you are and what you believe. So I think that idea of intrinsic versus extrinsic is an important component. And then the other thing I think that's maybe will help us kind of wrap it up a bit is there's a culture, right? If I feel like religion or spirituality is often one component of a culture, and so if I feel like I align with that component, then again, I'm going to report greater happiness. But if I don't, right? If I, let's say, I'll just take my own demographics as a white man from Utah. Obviously, there's a predominant religion there. But if I'm a white man, but I don't fit into that religion, then that religion might cause me some distress. It might make me feel uncomfortable. It might make me feel like, even if I am a religious person, but I just don't fit into the dominant religion, right? So now all of a sudden, my not fitting into the cultural norm, that might cause me some heartache or just or
Mhm.
challenge. Similarly, if I do adhere to a certain religious belief, but it's a minority belief, then I might then again, then it might cause me some distress. It might cause me like, is this religion serving me well? Is this so it's
Mhm.
so context of where religion is positioned in relationship to other variables can increase or decrease my happiness potentially with that religious belief. I think sometimes we hear these statistics of like, well, religious people are happier. And although generally that might be true, I think we have to also get into the nuances and say, but does that fit for me? Can I be intrinsically connected to a particular religious belief or to a
Mhm.
spiritual practice or whatever? And again, I think so we just keep coming back to this point, but like being intentional and saying, how do I want to live my life? And being aligned with my own values tends to increase happiness, whether we fit into the majority or not. How does that fit?
I think a big part of that is context. It's not just pick up a Bible and say you believe. What you just described was there has to be a personal connection to really receive fully the value that's in this or the benefits that's in this, that intrinsic piece that you talked about. And then also, you're not just isolated and existing all by yourself. It's what's around you. What are other people doing? What are other people valuing? And I suppose all of that should be taken into consideration since it does all impact, I would even argue, not just your spiritual well-being, but so much of your well-being in general.
Yeah, yeah, good point. Anything else that we need to make sure we get to about spiritual well being?
I know we still have all day left, but no, I don't have anything else.
All right, awesome. Well, hopefully that conversation can help you to be intentional. Kind of think about where do you want to be in the realm of spiritual well being. Like always, we would love to hear your thoughts, questions, comments, reactions to what we talk about. In the meantime, go be well.